For about 3 centuries, there was one vessel that just absolutely dominated the seas and rivers of Europe. It struck fear from Ireland all the way to the Black Sea. Now, this wasn't just a boat. It was a revolutionary weapon. It literally launched an entire age of exploration, trade, and, yeah, terror. So let's dive into the story of the Viking Longship and figure out how this masterpiece of engineering really did change the world.
Okay, just try to imagine this for a second. You're standing on the walls of Constantinople, the greatest city in the world at the time. And then, all of a sudden on the horizon, this fleet just appears, moving with this terrifying speed and purpose. For people who saw them arrive, like Patriarch Photius, it wasn't just an invasion, it felt like a force of nature. This quote, it just perfectly captures the shock and awe that the Longship inspired all across the known world.
And that was its true power. See, the Longship's greatest advantage wasn't just its speed, it was its sheer unpredictability. It could just show up on a remote coastline or sail hundreds of miles up a river to attack a city that thought it was totally safe. This ability to strike without any warning, that was the secret sauce to the Vikings' incredible success.
So how did one ship design manage all of this? Well, its genius was in its unique ability to master two completely different environments: the brutal open ocean and the shallow, winding inland rivers. This dual threat capability gave the Vikings a reach that, frankly, no one else had.
Just look at that shallow hull. While most ships back then needed these deep harbors, the Longship could pull right up onto a sandy beach. This meant warriors could storm a coastal town before anyone even had a chance to mount a defense. But it wasn't just for raiding. This same design let them navigate rivers like the Seine to threaten Paris, or the Volga to go trade with the Abbasid Caliphate. It basically turned entire continents into their own personal highway.
The Vikings were also, let's be honest, masters of psychological warfare. These ships were designed from the ground up to be intimidating. As this text from the 11th century shows, with their amazing carvings and sleek lines, they just looked terrifying. The battle was often won in the minds of their enemies before a single Viking even set foot on shore. But this scary image was backed up by some of the most advanced engineering of its time.
Which brings us to the big question: what made the Longship so technically incredible? I mean, it looks pretty simple, almost like a big canoe. But its design was deceptively smart, and it relied on one key innovation that set it apart from everything else on the water.
The secret was something called the clinker-build hull. So instead of placing wooden planks edge to edge, the Viking shipwrights overlapped them, kind of like shingles on a roof. This might seem like a small detail, but it was the absolute key to the Longship's strength, its flexibility, and its speed.
So on the right, you can see the standard method for other ships. A really heavy internal frame supports all the planks, and that makes the whole vessel rigid and heavy. But on the left, with a clinker method, the planks actually supported each other. This meant you could get away with a much lighter frame. The result? A ship that was not only faster, but also way more flexible. It could literally bend and ride with the waves of the North Atlantic instead of fighting them.
And the genius just didn't stop there. Norse shipwrights were master woodworkers. They split logs along the grain to keep the wood's natural strength. They used this super effective side rudder, the steerboard, which, fun fact, is where we get the nautical term starboard. A huge sail gave it power, anchored by a massive piece of timber called a keelson that kept the mast from snapping in a gale. Every single part of this thing was optimized.
Now, a technology this revolutionary doesn't just appear out of nowhere. The Longship was really the final product of over 1,000 years of Scandinavian shipbuilding evolution. It was this slow, deliberate process of innovation, with each generation building on the knowledge of the one before it.
Yeah, this journey took over a millennium. It started with boats like the Hortspring boat way back in 350 BC, which already had that basic clinker design. Almost 700 years later, the Needham boat adds crucial stuff like oar ports and a real steering blade. But the absolute game changer came in the late 8th century, the sail. Adding the sail transformed this tough rowboat into a long-range vessel of conquest and exploration, and with it, the Viking Age truly began.
The Longship was so much more than just a tool for war and trade. To really get the Vikings, you have to understand that this ship was at the absolute center of their culture. It was a symbol of everything they cared about: wealth, power, and even their journey into the afterlife.
Think about it. These ships were incredibly expensive and difficult to build. They needed specialized labor and huge amounts of resources, so owning one was the ultimate display of power and status. They were basically the super yachts of their day, and only the most powerful jarls and kings could ever hope to build and crew one.
And this spiritual side is so important. Vikings believed the longship could actually ferry souls to the afterlife. As travelers like Ibn Fadlan described, some chieftains were put on their ships and set on fire, sailing in flames to Odin's halls. Others practiced ship burial, where they would bury their leaders inside their magnificent vessels, surrounded by all the treasures of their life.
And here's the amazing part. That's exactly why we know so much about them today. These burial rituals, especially burying ships under these huge amounts of earth, preserved them in incredible condition. The famous Oseberg and Gokstad ships, found in Norway, are our primary sources. They tell us exactly how these vessels were built, sailed, and used. Their funerals literally became our history books.
But you know how it goes. Like all dominant technologies, the age of the longship eventually came to an end. It wasn't really defeated in battle. It's more that the world it was designed for simply changed around it, making its unique advantages, well, obsolete. As Scandinavia became more integrated into Christian Europe, the old priorities just shifted. This wasn't just a cultural change, it was a massive economic one. The whole financial model moved away from raiding and towards large-scale commerce. And the longship, a vessel built for speed and carrying warriors, just wasn't built for this new world. The longship's successor, a ship called the cog, was a completely different animal. Where the longship was shallow and fast for raiding, the cog was deep and broad, designed to carry huge amounts of cargo. We're talking at least twice as much. It was also cheaper to build, and with its high sides, it was actually more defensible against pirates. So for an age defined by moving goods, not warriors, the cog was just the better tool for the job. And so, after centuries of dominating the waves, the longship just faded away. By the 15th century, as new ships like caravels were starting to explore the globe, the vessel that had once defined an entire age was gone, sailing on only in the sagas and the stories of its people. The longship was so much more than wood and sail. It was the engine of an era. It shaped everything from warfare to trade to culture. And it leaves us with a pretty fascinating question for today. If the longship defined the Viking Age, what is the single technology, the one tool, network, or innovation that people will look back on as defining our age?